So now let's take a look at the application that we're building. So we're building a React scoreboard application. Now this application is built with the help of React, one of the most popular and powerful JS frameworks that are out there. Now in this particular course, we'll be learning about React hooks, about state management, and obviously some good practices when trying to develop a React application. Now if we just jump and take a look at our application, so you might see that we are having these three players. We can increase their score. But the moment the person's score increases, you might see a little crown over there that says that this person is having the highest score. But if I increase the score of Janet to twice, then you might see that the crown has shifted now to her. And if I just increase this to 3 times, then the crown has just shifted. Now I could remove these players from the list. I could add a player. For example, if I like to add Tony and hit enter, the Tony has been added. We can have a stopwatch override over here that can start, as you might be able to see that. And if we just keep on increasing, so at the moment we are having 3 players and the total number of points are 11, and the one who is winning is the Janet. If I decide that I do not want Tony over here, then you might see that total number of players is 9 and total point is 2. So this is our application. I could stop this and I could reset the entire match or the stopwatch. So this is the application that we're building inside of this particular project.
So now we'll be creating the React application. But before we do that, there is a prerequisite, and that is you need to have Node.js installed on your systems, which I'm going to presume that you already have. But if you don't, then download it from the official website. At the time of recording this video, Node is on version 16.1.14.0. Now to check your Node version, just open up the command prompt and run the command node with a -v, and this should give you your Node version. Node is on version 16.14.0, same as this. Alright, now we'll be using the CRA utility of Facebook because it does saves us a lot of work. Now to create and run your application, you just need these 3 commands, and that are namely npx create react app followed by the name of your application. Then you have to change directories inside of your application and then launch your server from there. Now let's just create a React app now. So open up the command prompt and run the command npx create react app followed by the name of the app. One particular naming restriction that we have over here is that we just cannot have uppercase letters inside of our application's name. We just need to have lowercase letters. So the name is React Scoreboard. Alright, let's make sure that there are hyphens inside them. So React Scoreboard for a better reading purpose. Okay, now hit enter and it is going to take some amount of time to generate your React app. Alright, now apart from this, we also need a code editor. Throughout this particular course, I'll be using the Visual Studio Code, but I'm going to recommend that you should use Visual Studio Code because it does come with a lot of features that might come in handy when you're developing your application. Not only this one, but any application. Alright, now to download this VS Code, you just have to go to the official website, that's code.visualstudio.com, and download the required installer. It can be for Mac, Windows, or Linux. But if you have some personal preference, for example like Atom or Sublime, then feel free to use it, because at the end of the day we just need a code editor. Alright, so now we see our application has successfully been created for us, and we have these commands. So let's just open up the VS Code instance of our application. Now the first step is that we'll be changing directories inside of our application. Now to do that, just change directories to your React scoreboard. Alright, so now I'm inside my React scoreboard directory. Now to launch a VS Code instance of this particular application, just run the command code with a period, and this should open up a VS Code instance of application. Now note this particular thing, that this is only going to work if you have Visual Studio Code installed. Alright, so this is the Visual Studio Code instance of our application. Now let's take a look at the folder structure of our application. So we are having this directory with the name node modules. So as the name suggests, this is going to contain the node packages that we have installed inside of our application. Okay, so inside this you might be able to see the Babel and .env. So this is all that the CRA utility has configured for us. Okay, so apart from these node modules, we are having this public folder, and inside this we are having certain files, namely the favicon.ico, index.html. So if you head into your index.html, you might be able to see that there are certain meta and link tags. This meta tag is going to contain the description of your application, of what this particular site is going to do or what it functions, as well as this title and the node no script tag and a div with id root. All right, and two logos and manifest.json. Okay, now let's take a look into our source directory, and you might be able to see the CSS files and JavaScript files and test runner files. Now inside this, you might be able to see this index.js file. So this is going to sit at the top of our application. Now whatever code is going to compile, you might see this id root, and if you recall that inside of our index.html, we are having this div with id root. So all the code that is going to be compiled up is going to be dumped up over here. All right, now after this, let's give this a first run. But before we do that, let's take a look into the package.json. So inside this package.json file, you might be able to see certain script commands and the dependencies that we have. So that are namely our React, React DOM, and React script. Now, this is only because we have used the CRA that we are getting this pre-installed for us. Otherwise, when creating a React application from scratch, you might have to manually install all of this. So now to start a development server, just open up the inbuilt terminal that you have over here. To do that, just click on this terminal or follow the shortcut that has appeared on the screen. Now to do that, just run the command npm start, and this should start a development server with localhost 3000 loaded into a browser. Alright, so this is what the CRA utility gives us, a spinning React logo along with two text. Alright, so now we'll do as this browser suggests us. We'll be making some changes inside the app.js file. So head inside of your VS Code, and inside this, get rid of this particular header over there. So alright, now get rid of this and instead have a h1 tag inside this, and we'll be having the text that states that it's working. Now hit save, and let's head back into our browser. So now you must see all that template has gone now. We are seeing our h1 text that's working. Now there are certain extensions that I'd like to suggest to you before we move any further. So head inside of your extensions marketplace, and inside this, the first extension that you'll need is the auto close tag. So search for auto close, and here it is. Now the name is self-explanatory what it does. So for example, if I just open my app.js file, and inside this, apart from this h1, I decided that I need a h2 or heading 2 tag. So you might see that this closing tag has auto generated for us. So this is what this auto close tag does. So install it. I have already installed this inside my system, so just install it. Apart from this auto close tag, you'll also be needing this auto rename tag. So search for this auto rename tag, and this is also self-sufficient. For example, at certain point of time, I decide that no, I do not want this to be a heading 2 tag, rather I want this to be a paragraph element. So I just change it to paragraph element, and the corresponding closing tag also changes itself to the paragraph element. So this is what the auto rename tag is going to do. Now there's this third extension that might come in handy, and that is your bracket pair colorizer. So it colorizes your bracket. As you can see that the corresponding brackets are having similar color, and if I decide that there are going to be more pair of brackets inside this, so they're going to have a similar color. Alright, now this ES7 code snippets. Now there are going to be instances inside of this particular course where you'll be needing to generate a boilerplate, and manually typing it can be quite cumbersome. For example, if I just want to create a functional component, then I could just run rafc, and this is going to create a functional component for me. Or if I decide that no, I want a class component, then just run rcc, and it is going to give you a class component. So yeah, they do come in handy, and they're having the code snippets for React, Redux, and React Native snippets. Apart from this, you'll also be needing this npm extension. So as it suggests that this extension supports running npm script defined in the package.json, and you just saw back then what those scripts were. They were namely the start, the build, run, and eject. Also, this npm intelligence might come in handy if you're using third-party libraries, as well as install this prettier code formatter. So this is going to help you to format your code. All you have to do is just press Ctrl Alt and F, and your code has been formatted for you. Alright, so now let's make sure that it's default. Okay, so these are all about the extensions that you will need inside of this particular application. Now after this, let's create the components that we need. Alright, so now let's first create the components that we need inside of our application. So head into your source directory and let's close this public directory as well, and inside the source we'll be creating a folder with the name components. Alright, so now inside this folder we'll be having multiple components. The first one is going to be add player form. So let's create a component, add player form.js, and apart from this particular form we'll also be having another component that is going to be our counter. So let's create another file with the name counter.js. So we are having these two files. Now apart from this file we'll also be having another component that's going to be mainly header. So this is going to be serving as the header of our application. So we are having these three components at the moment. Now apart from this we'll also be having this icon.js. Now this icon.js file has been provided to you, so you do not need to make it. Just copy this file with the assets folder that has been provided to you and paste it over here. Now after this icon we'll also be having another component that's player. So let's create that component now. This is going to be handling the data of the individual players. So now apart from this player we'll also be having another component that's going to be for stats, basically the statistics of our application. So stats.js, and the last one being the stopwatch.js. So let's create the stopwatch. Alright, so these are all the components that we need. Now I'll be moving my app.js inside of this components folder, and what this is going to do is that it is going to make sure that our application breaks, and that's basically because if I just head into my index.js file, you might see that we are still importing app from the same directory where it doesn't exist. So let's update this data as well. So now we are having our app inside of our components folder, and inside the components we are having our app.js. Alright, now we are good with this. And now let's close off all the other editors that are out here. So now the first component that we'll be creating is going to be our app.js component. So head into your app.js file and clean up all the code that's in here. Now we want this to be a class component, so we'll be using our code snippets. So to create a class component, just run rcc and hit enter, and this should give you your class component. Now just out of personal preference, I just put this export default at the end of my file. So export default, this is just a personal preference, you can do whatever you choose. This is just how I like to do my stuff. Now inside this, what we're going to do is that the first step that will follow is that we'll be creating the structure of this particular application. Now inside this we'll be having a div, so let's create a div of class name app. So this div is going to be of class name app. So let's create a div and give this a class name, that's app. Alright, so now inside this div of class name app, we'll be creating a header. So let's create that header, which we have already created over here. So we'll be importing this particular header. So let's import this header that is in the same directory. So import header, this is coming from the same directory that we are in. Alright, so we are importing this now. Now let's just place it over here. Alright, so here is our header now. Now this inside this header we'll be passing it with certain props, and that are going to be mainly a title and player. But for the timing, let's just pass the title because we haven't yet created the methods that are going to handle them. So title, this is going to be equal to React scoreboard, or perhaps just scoreboard. Now inside this we'll be having another div of class name players list. So let's create a div, and this is going to have a class name, and that's going to be equal to player list, player hyphen list. Alright, so this is the place where we'll be mapping the data of the players. So what we're going to do is that we'll be mapping the data of the players. So let's put a player over here, but we are yet to import this inside of our application or app.js. So let's import our player. This is coming from our same directory. Alright, so now we are importing a players as well. Now this is going to take up several data which are going to pass to it once we create our state. Now right beneath this, what we're going to do is that we'll be displaying a form. So basically that's going to be our add form. So let's import it first. This is coming from our same directory. So add player form. So right beneath this player, just put this add player form. Alright, so this is the structure or the basic skeleton of our application. Now let's create the methods as well as the state. So head up right above your render, and inside this create the state. And inside the state will be having the data of the players. So let's create a player, and this is going to be an array of objects. So this array is going to contain the name as well as a certain ID. So a name, and that's going to be equal to Lewis. And apart from this name, it's also going to contain an ID. So let's give this as an ID of 1 and a score. And each and every player is going to have an initial score of 0. Now they are going to be similar kind of players. So let's make sure that the default amount is 3. So just copy this and paste it 3 times. Now it is not to mention that each player is going to have a different name. So Kate and an ID that's going to be equal to 2 and a score that's 0. And at last, John Doe. Alright, so these are our players. Now I need to change this ID as well. So we are having a state of our application now. Alright, so this should be right over here. Okay, now after this, what we're going to do is that we'll be creating the methods inside of our application. So what all methods do we need? We need a method to add, a method to remove. So apart from our add and remove, we also need a method to handle the score change. So method to handle score change. And apart from these 3 methods, we'll also needing method to get or calculate the high score, get high score. That means the person who's having the highest score inside of the particular game. So these are all the methods that we'll be needing. So let's create them one by one. Alright, so now let's create the methods that we need. So the first on our list is the capability to add players into our list. So let's create this. Alright, so this is going to be an arrow function, and it's going to take a parameter that's basically going to be equal to name. So give this an arrow. Now inside this we'll be setting the state. So this dot set state, and this is going to take up the previous state. So give this a previous state. And we'll be returning. Inside this return we'll be making sure that players is equal to let's spread the previous state. That's going to contain the data of all the players that we have inside of our state. So previous state dot players. So first we'll be spreading this data, and right after this we'll be adding the data that we are getting. So square bracket, because that's how this is. And right after this let's add the new data member. So that is also going to contain a name. This name is going to be the name that we are uh, getting inside of the parameter. as well as a score. So this score is going to be equal to 0 and an ID. So the new player is going to have the ID that's going to be an increment of 1 from the previous player's ID. So that's what we're going to do is that we'll make sure that this dot priv player dot ID plus equals 1. So it should be added by 1. So that means if this is going to have an ID 3, this is the last player, then the next player that's going to be added after him is going to have the ID 4, and consequently the number is going to increase. So this is our handle player method that we have created right over here. Now after this, let's create the next method that's going to be having the capability to remove players from our list. So this is going to take up an ID. So handle remove player. This is going to take up an ID as a parameter because that's more than sufficient for us to remove that particular player from the list. So now inside this, let's set the state. So right inside over here, this dot set state. So this dot set state, and inside this, let's pass it the previous state. And inside this, we'll return players, but this time the players that will be returned will be passed through filter first. So what you're going to do is that prev state dot players, and we'll be using the filter method. So filter, and this is going to take up a person. So each and every time this is going to take up a person that is going to have a name, an ID, and a score. So each and every time this is going to take up a person, and what we're going to do is that if this happens that the p.id p.id is not equals to the ID that has been served to us, then return that, and if this happens that the ID is equal, then do not return it. So that is the data that's going to be stored inside of our players. So if I just take this example that I supplied that I do not want Kate inside of my list, so the ID of 2 is going to be passed. So when this ID is passed over here and the filter method is applied, then for every ID this is going to be equal to true. That means that is not going to be equal to the number 2, but the moment Kate hits the list, that means that is she's going to have the ID equal to 2. That means this is going to turn to false, therefore that won't be returned. So this is a handle remove now. Now after this, let's create the third method inside of our application, that's mainly a score change. So this is going to take up 2 parameters. So this is going to be a handle score change, and this is another function as well, and this is going to take up 2 parameters, namely index, the index, and as well as a parameter delta. Now this is another function, and inside this what we're going to do is that we'll be setting state. So this dot set state, and inside this too is also going to take the previous state. So prev state, and inside this we'll be setting the score now. So the score is going to be equal to previous state. So prev state dot players and the index. So the index of the player that we want to increment the data of dot score. This is going to be equal to pre-player index dot score plus the delta value. So we'll be using the shorthand method. So plus the delta value. Alright, so this is what we are doing inside of our handle score change. That's going to enable us to change the score of our players. That's going to be relative to the player. Now after this, the fourth method that is our get high score method. So let's create this as well. Now get high score. This too is an arrow function, but this is not going to take up any parameters. And inside this, we'll be creating a constant. So this const is going to have the name scores, and this is going to be equal to this dot state dot players. Alright, so let's put it equal to players, not player just. So alright, so this dot state dot players, and inside this players will be mapping this data inside this. So dot map players dot map. Alright, now inside this map, each and every time this is going to take up a individual person, and this is going to map this data. So p dot score, this is what we are mapping over here. So this is the data that is going to be stored inside of our score constant. Now let's create another constant that is going to be known as high score. This is going to be equal to math.max. So basically we'll finding the maximum value and spread the constant score. So what lies inside score needs to be spread inside this max function. And after this, what we're going to do is that if high score is true, then return high score, otherwise return null. So this is going to help us to get the high score. Alright, so now we are having all the methods. Now let's adjust our structure according to our methods. So what we're going to do is that we are having a div of class name app. So this should be okay, and a header with title. Now this header is going to take up one more parameter than just the title, and that's going to be players. So we'll be passing it the players. This is going to be equal to this dot state dot players. So this is one of the data that we are passing our header now. So after this passing this particular data, that's namely our header, we will be heading inside of our div of class name playlist. Now this playlist, inside this playlist we'll be passing the data, but before we do that we need to map each and every player, because this is an individual players component. So the first step is that we'll be mapping the data. So this dot state dot players, and we'll be mapping this data. So map, and inside this map, each and every time this is going to take up a player as well as ID. So a player as well as an IDX. So this is the ID of the player. Alright, so now we're mapping this data, and inside this map what we're going to do is that we'll be using brackets, and inside this we'll be placing our player. So just put this player over here. Alright, now we want the React to yell at us, yeah, that each and every mapped component should have a unique key, so we'll be providing it with a key. So this key is going to be the key. This is going to be equal to player dot id, and just make sure that it's stringified, so toString. Alright, so we'll be passing it other properties as well, but for now let's just leave it like this. Okay, so after this key, give this an id as well. This id is going to be equal to the player id. So player dot id, and after this player id we'll also be giving this an index. So this index is going to be equal to the index, and after this index so this index is idx. Alright, Now after this, give this the score. So we'll also passing the score that we have that of that particular player. So player.score, and after this score we'll also be giving this a change score method. So the property to change score. So change score, this is going to be equal to this dot handle score change. All right, so this is great. Now after this change score we are having the player's name and also uh, the remove player functionality. So player name is going to be equal to player dot name, and after this player dot name we'll also be giving this the remove player method. So remove player, this is going to be equal to handle remove player. And is high score, this is going to be equal to high score triple equals player score. If that's true, then the true is going to be sent via props inside of player, and if false, then false. So high score is player dot score. So if it happens that the player is having the highest score, then that means this is true, and if it doesn't, then that means it's false. So high score. Now we need to create this high score right over here. So let's create this high score. So const high score, this is going to be equal to this dot get high score. All right, so now we have made the necessary changes inside of this. Now the last piece that remains is to add the method that has the property to add players inside of application and pass that method inside of our add player form. So let's do this. Add player, this is going to be equal to this dot handle add player. Alright, so now we are done entirely with our app.js file. So now we'll be creating the next component, that's a player.js component. So this is going to be a pure component. So we are having two choices. Either we could use the should component update lifecycle method, or we can use the pure component. So we would like to opt for a pure component. So just to create a class-based pure component, just run the command rcpe, and this should give you your class pure component. So if you're wondering what this pure component is, if I put this into layman language, that would be that if the previous value of state of props and the new value of state of props is the same, then the component will not re-render itself. Um, so that's why we're using the pure component. Now inside this, what we're going to have is a div first. So let's create a div. And this div is going to have a class name of player. So let's give this a class name of player. So class name is going to be player, and inside this div what we're going to have is another div of class name player name. So let's create another div of class name player name. And inside this div of class name player name we'll be having a button. So let's create this button. Alright, so we're having this button. This is going to have a X that's going to enable us to remove the player. Now right after this button we'll be having the icon. So if you're wondering what this icon is, so this file has already been provided to you, and that it is a SVG icon. So that's all there is to it. Just copy and paste it over there. So now we'll be importing our icon. So let's import our icon as well. So icon, this is coming from our same directory. So same directory icon. All right. Now right after this button, we want to place this icon over here. Alright, so this is our icon. Now this icon is going to take up the value is high score. Alright, so we are yet to destructure the data over here. So let's just leave it like this for now. And after this, what we're going to do is that we'll be placing our name. So let's place the name over here. This is also the data that we're getting via help of props. So why don't we actually first destructure the data right over here? So just above your return, let's create a const. And if I just open up my app.js, so inside this, let's see what all data is being passed over here. We are passing it a key, a ID, a index, scope, change scope, and some other functions. So let's just import them here. So name, ID, as well as we are also getting our scope and our remove player method and our change scope. So let's recheck it. Change scope, name, remove player is high scope. So we're also getting our is high score. So let's get over here and is high score. Now this is going to be equal to props. Alright, now we can use these values inside over here. So name, and after this name, what we're going to do is that we'll be having a div. So let's create the div. So right after this, let's create another div, and this div is going to have the class name that's going to be equal to player score. Alright, so inside this div we'll be calling a counter, which we haven't created yet, but we will. So let's counter and import a counter as well. This counter is coming from the same directory. Okay, now inside this icon, let's pass in the data that is high score. Is high score. Now if you just see your icon.js, that this svg is going to have a class name that is going to be dynamically rendered based on the fact that is high score is true or not. So if it is, then the class name is going to be is high score, otherwise the class name is going to be null. So let's close these two now. So this is the data that we are passing to it. Apart from this, inside this counter we'll be passing certain data to this as well. So this is going to take up the score, index, and change score method. So pass those three properties, the namely the score, which is equal to score, index, which is going to be equal to index, so let's place index over here as well, and let me just confirm whether we are passing this or not. So index, yeah, we are. And after this index, the third property that we are going to pass this is the change score. So change score, this is going to be equal to change score. So this is what all this needs. Now after this, what we're going to do is that we'll be giving this an on click. So let's give this button a class name as well as on click. So the class name is going to be remove player, remove hyphen player, as well as a on click. So on click, this is going to be equal to remove player and pass in the ID of that particular player. So this is our entire player.js file. Let's save this. And now the next is the turn of our counter.js. So let's save this and create a counter.js. So now let's create the next component, that is a counters component. So head into your counters and close off all the other components that are right over here. Now the first step is going to be that it will be creating up a functional component. So just run rafc and this should give you a functional component. All right, now inside this what you're going to do is that we are getting props. So we are getting props. All right. Now, just out of my own curiosity, I'll just export this at the bottom. So export default counter. All right, now we're good with this. Now, rather than having this div, we'll also be adding a class name to it. So give this a class name that is going to be score. All right, now inside this div, what you're going to have, so let's just get rid of this count over here. And instead, we'll be having inside this div a button, basically two buttons. So let's create these two buttons. One is going to be to subtract and other is going to be for addition. So let's create another button, and this is going to be so that we can add. All right, so we are having these two buttons. Now these two buttons are all that we need. Apart from this, we'll also be having a div in between them. So let's create another div inside of them. So a div, and this div is going to have the class name of score result. So score result. All right, so this div is going to display the score. Now inside this we'll be having props dot score. All right, so now each and every button is going to have certain properties that are being passed to them via help of props. So the first one is being the class name. So class name is going to be equal to score button. So score hyphen button as well as decrement. All right, now after this an onClick property. So this onClick is going to be equal to the one that we are passing, that's props dot handle change. Let me just check what I just passed from there. That is our player. All right, so we are passing this onClick. Where's that counter? All right, okay, so we are passing change score over there. So change score. All right, so this is the onClick property that we're passing to it. Now this is going to be responsible to decrease the data. So props dot index subtracted by 1. And after this button is also going to have a class name as well as onClick. So give this a class name that's going to be equal to score button increment. So score button score hyphen button increment, and this increment is going to have onClick as well. So onClick on click, this is going to be equal to similar to that, but rather this is going to increment the property. So change score props dot index plus 1. All right, so we have created a counter.js as well now. So this counter is going to be responsible to display the counters data. So now let's create the next component, that is a counters component. So head into your counters and close off all the other components that are right over here. Now the first step is going to be that it will be creating up a functional component. So just run rafc and this should give you a functional component. All right, now inside this what you're going to do is that we are getting props. So we are getting props. All right, now just out of my own curiosity, I'll just export this at the bottom. So export default counter. All right, now we're good with this. Now rather than having this div, we'll also be adding a class name to it. So give this a class name that is going to be score. All right, now inside this div what you're going to have, so let's just get rid of this count over here, and instead we'll be having inside this div a button, basically two buttons. So let's create these two buttons. One is going to be to subtract and other is going to be for addition. So let's create the button, and this is going to be so that we can add. All right. So we are having these two buttons. Now these two buttons are all that we need. Apart from this, we'll also be having a div in between them. So let's create another div inside of them. So a div, and this div is going to have the class name of score result. So score result. All right. So this div is going to display the score. Now inside this we'll be having props dot score. Alright, so now each and every button is going to have certain properties that are being passed to them via help of props. So the first one is being the class name. So class name is going to be equal to score button. So score hyphen button as well as decrement. Alright, now after this an onClick property. So this onClick is going to be equal to the one that we are passing, that's props dot handle change. Let me just check what I just passed from there. That is our player. All right, so we are passing this on click. Where's that counter? All right, okay, so we are passing change score over there. So change score. All right, so this is the on click property that we are passing to it. Now this is going to be responsible to decrease the data. So props dot index subtracted by 1. And after this button is also going to have a class name as well as on click. So give this a class name that's going to be equal to score button increment. So score button score hyphen button increment, and this increment is going to have on click as well. So on click this is going to be equal to similar to that, but rather this is going to increment the property. So change score props dot index +1. All right, so we have created a counter.js as well now. So this counter is going to be responsible to display the counters data. Now let's create the header component. So head into your header, and this is going to be a functional component, so RFC. All right, now inside this we'll be importing two other components, that's namely a stat as well as a stopwatch. So import stats, this is coming from the same directory. So stats, all right. Apart from this, also stopwatch. So import stopwatch. This two lies in the same directory. So stopwatch. All right. So these are the two components that we are needing. Now, rather than having a div, we'll be having a header. So header, and inside this header, we'll be having two components, namely our stats as well as a header. So stats, and apart from the stats, we'll also be having the stopwatch. So let's place this over here as well. So stopwatch. All right, now needless to say that we'll be passing data with help of props. So let's do this. All right, and apart from that, and between these two stats as well as stopwatch, we'll be having a title. So h1 tag heading 1, and inside this props dot title. Now as usual, I'll just make sure that I export it at the end. So export default header, and let's pass in the players as well. So inside the stats, pass in the players. This is going to be equal to props.players. All right, now is the time that we should move into our stats and create them. Now afterwards, we'll be moving into stopwatch. So let's hit save and move into our stats now. So head into your stats.js, and inside this we'll start to configure this. So this too is going to be a functional component, so run rfce, and inside the stats we are also getting props. Alright, now this div is not the one that is going to stay up over here, rather we'll be having a table, and this table is going to have the class name of stats. So give this the class name. Alright, now inside this table we'll be having a t body, that means tables body, and inside this t body we'll be having a tr tag, and right inside this tr we'll be having two tds. So td, now let's just copy this right over here and paste it again. Now each and every td is going to have some specific roles that are assigned to them. So players, and the latter one is going to display the total number of players. So that's namely uh, props dot player dot length. Alright, now after this we'll be having another tr, so let's create that, and inside this tr we'll be having our total points. So let's just copy this and paste it over there, copy and paste. This time we'll be having total points. Alright, so let's use the reduce method. So come right over here, and we'll be creating a const, and this const is going to be total points, and this is going to be equal to props dot player dot reduce. So players dot reduce. So since this reduce, in layman language, what reduce is that it sums up an entire array. So that's why we are using reduce. Now this is going to take up two parameters. One is going to be the previous value, and the other is going to be the current value, and we'll be summing this up. Now this also takes up a second one more argument, and that is going to be equal to the initial argument for the previous value. So if I just pass in this 0, that means the previous is going to have the value of 0. So we are having this previous as well as this current. So what we are going to do is that we'll be returning, so return previous plus current dot score. So this is what we're going to have inside of total points. Well, let's create another const, and this is going to be for total players now, just for sake of uniformity inside of our application. So props dot players dot length. Alright, so this is our total players as well as total points. So now what I'm going to do is that a dot over here, rather than having this entire statement, let's get rid of this and have total points players, and in the lowest shell let's have total points. Alright, so we have created our stats as well. Now let's head inside of our stopwatch and start to create it.
So now we are almost done with all the components. The only one that remains is our form as well as our stopwatch. So let's create a stopwatch first, and afterwards we'll be creating our form. So you just run the command rcc, and this should give you a class component. Alright, so as usual, I'll make sure that I export it at the end. So export default. This is my stopwatch. Alright, so this is a stopwatch component. Now inside this will be having state. So right above your render method, let's have a state. This state is going to be equal to is running. This is going to have the initial value of true, as well as elapsed time and previous time. Elapsed time, this is 0. A lowercase I guess, and total time. So this is our state. Now let's create the methods first before we move into the structure. So the first method being handle stopwatch. So handle stopwatch. Now this is going to take up. This is going to be an arrow function. So give this make this an arrow function, and inside this we'll be setting the state. So this dot set state. This dot set state, and inside this set state will be setting the state. But before we do that, we need to get in the previous data. And this is going to return or turn over and the status of is running. Is running is going to be equal to not of previous state is running. So previous state dot is running. So this is going to make sure that our is running has been set it up to opposite of what it was before. After this, we'll be creating another method that is going to be called tick. So let's create that. So now this tick is going to be an arrow function. So it's supposed to be outside of this method, not inside that. Alright, now inside this tick, what we're going to do is that we'll be checking for if not this dot state and this dot state and dot is running. So if this is the case, then what you want to do is that then we want to create const now, and this is going to be equal to date dot now. And after that, what you're going to do is that just head out of this, and now it's time to set the state. So set state, and inside the set state, what we're going to do is that we'll be taking out the previous parameter. So prev state, and inside this, what we're going to do is that
We'll make sure that the previous time is equals to now, which we just created above. So now, and after that we'll also be calculating elapsed time. So elapsed time is going to be equal to previous state dot elapsed time plus now minus this dot state dot previous time. Alright, so now we have created the take method as well. Now the certain other methods that we need to create are small. So first is one is going to be handle reset. So let's create that method now. So right outside this, let's create another method handle reset, and this is arrow function now, and inside this we'll be setting the state. So this dot set state, and inside this set state we'll be setting the elapsed time to 0 here. So this is our reset method. Now after this, what we're going to do is that we'll be creating two lifecycle methods that are mainly our component did mount as well as component will unmount. So let's use them now. This is going to be equal to set interval, and inside this set interval we'll be calling an article. This dot tick after interval of 1 second. Now the next lifecycle method is going to be component will unmount. So let's create that as well. So inside this component will unmount, what we're going to do is that we'll be clearing the interval, and inside this pass in this dot interval. All right, so this is what we're doing inside of these lifecycle hook. Now let's come inside our render, and inside this render what we're going to do is that we'll be creating a const. So let's do that. This const is going to be called seconds, and this seconds is going to be math.flow. This dot state dot elapsed time divide by 1000. So this should give you the mathematical number of seconds. So this is going to be the number of seconds that we have. Now we'll be creating the structure of our application. So head inside this, and what we're going to do is that inside the return we'll be having a div of class name stopwatch. Class name stopwatch. Now let's close this as well, and inside this stopwatch what we'll be having is, now inside this we'll be having a heading to tag, and inside this let's have a heading to tag, and inside this heading 2 we'll be having the stopwatch text. So stopwatch. Now right inside this we'll be having a span. So let's create a span now. This is going to be a class name. So this is a class name now. So class name is going to be equal to stopwatch item. So stopwatch hyphen item, and this is going to display seconds. So alright, so this is a span now, and right beneath this span we'll be having a button. So let's create that button. Now this button is going to have the text start or stop based on the fact that whether we are running a game or not. So what we're going to do is that if this running this dot state dot is running is true, then we want to display the text stop, because that means the game is already on, and otherwise start. So this is a button. Now this button is also going to have an on click, so let's give this on click. This dot handle stopwatch. So this is a button, and we have now created a stopwatch component. So now we'll be creating the final component of our application, that being our addPlayerForm.js. So this is going to be a class-based component, and we know what the code snippet is. It's RCC to create a class-based component. So let's make it one. So all right, now we are good with this. Now we need this to be exported at the end. So that's what we're going to do. So let's export this at the end. So export default addPlayerForm. All right, now this is going to be a form, so let's make it one. So form. All right, now inside this form we'll be having an input field first. So let's create an input field, and this input field is going to be of type text because it's going to hold the name. And after this input type of text, will also give this a value that's going to be equal to state. So this dot state dot value, but we haven't created the state yet, so let's create the state. So state is going to be having a key value, and this is going to hold an empty string for the moment. All right, so this is our state now. All right, so now let's close this. Okay, so now inside this input we'll be having an on change event as well as a placeholder. So we'll be adding the on change event after we create the method, but now let's give this a placeholder. So placeholder is going to be enter name. All right, so this is a placeholder, and after this placeholder we'll also be having another input that is going to be of type submit. This is of type submit, as well as this is going to have a value that's going to be equal to add player. All right, so these are our two inputs. Now let's create the method that we need inside of our component. So for that purpose, just head up, and the two methods namely are handle change as well as handle submit. So let's create those methods. So right beneath your state handle change, this is going to be an arrow function. All right, now inside this handle change, what you're going to do is that it's going to take up an event, and it's going to target the values. So let's give this an event, and this is going to make sure that this dot set state, and inside this value is going to be equal to, so value is going to be equal to e dot target dot value. So this is our state now, and the value. Now after this, one more component, that one more method, I mean, that's going to handle the submit or submission of our form. So handle submit. This too is going to take up an event and arrow function. All right, looks like okay. So it needs to be out of this. Okay. Now the first thing inside this, what you're going to do is that will be making sure that our browser doesn't reloads. So e dot prevent default. Now inside this, what you're going to do is that we'll be adding functionality so that we can add the form data. So if you recall inside of our application, so inside the app.js, if I just move into my app.js, so inside this we are passing this method that is add player via props. So this is what we're going to access over there so that we can add data. So this dot props dot add player. So this is the method that we are getting through props from our app.js, in which we are having this particular method with the name add player. So now inside this, we'll be passing it the state value. So this dot state dot value. All right. So now we are sending this particular data. Now after this, we want that once the data has been entered, our input fields to be cleared. So what you're going to do is that this dot set state, and inside this, we'll make sure that the value is again set it up to an empty string. Okay. So now we are good with this. Now just we need to supply these functions or these methods inside of these inputs. So this is going to have an onChange property now. So onChange, this is going to be equal to handle change. And this form is going to have an onSubmit. That's going to be accessing this dot handle submit. All right, so now we have successfully created all the components that we need and our application is complete.